Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I'm here to talk about a movie that I just saw, The Flash. Now, this is a movie that I decided not to see in the theater. I don't get to see that many movies out in the theater these days. I have to be pretty choosy, and this is one I definitely chose not to see in the theater. I didn't really want to support it by giving Warner Brothers my money. I didn't really support some of their decision making regarding the stuff going on with Ezra Miller. But I was curious to see the movie, particularly because it was sort of being touted as the final DCEU movie. But also, even though we're in this moment of the multiverse where every movie is about a multiverse, I've always been a huge fan of the multiverse stuff. I was curious to see how they did it with the movies, considering they've already done a bunch of multiverse stuff in the DC TV shows. And so I decided to wait until it came out on my old television here on HBO Max or Max or whatever they're calling it these days. And so finally, my wife and I watched it the other day, and I wanted to share my thoughts. Now, there's going to be a bunch of spoilers here. So if you don't want to be spoiled for it, then you should probably watch one of my other videos instead, because it's tremendous entertainment content. But anyway, having said that, it wasn't good. It was entertaining, but it was deeply flawed, had a lot of problems. So it was a movie that, we were entertained. There were lines that were funny. There were scenes that were funny. We didn't regret watching it. But we also were both, by the end of the movie in particular, were doing other things while we were watching it. I want to start with the good stuff. Let's start with the good stuff. There were some funny bits. And I appreciated this sort of them going out of their way to be entertaining, which is something that some of the early DCEU movies were definitely not. They didn't want to be fun. They didn't, and entertainment wasn't really their goal. A lot of those early DCEU movies, they seemed like what they really wanted to do was punish you for being a fan. In this case, on the other hand, they were trying to reward you theoretically for being a fan, because they did have some fun stuff. Like, one thing I appreciated was how they handled the Flash slow-mo scene, right? Because they're always going to have a hard task there. The Quicksilver scenes in the X-Men movies are some of the best scenes in those movies and sort of the most famous. And so particularly the first one from Days of Future Past. And so Flash is always going to be held up against that. So the opening sequence of Flash, I thought, was actually quite funny, because they did a very similar super slow-mo Flash saving things, but they basically ramped it up to Mad Magazine levels of absurd goofiness to sort of give it its own flavor. It wasn't just that he was going super slow to save a whole bunch of babies that had fallen out of a building, but the babies were all about to be killed in ridiculous ways. Like, one of them, a blowtorch was about to hit him in midair, and another one, acid was falling on the baby, and there were knives hitting this other baby, and it was ridiculous, all happening in midair. So it was super over the top and ridiculous. And Flash was running out of energy while he was doing it, because he hadn't eaten enough. So he was trying to eat hot dogs and stuff while he's saving the babies. It was fun. There was a ton of fan service, and some of it was great. Everyone's already said this in their own versions, their own reactions, and anyone that's seen the movie will probably tell you the best part of the movie was definitely Michael Keaton. Now, some of the fan service with Michael Keaton was so blatant that it was a little too much. Having him not just quote his most famous lines from Batman 1989, but when he would be getting ready to say them, the camera would zoom in on him, and the music would swell and then stop, so he could be like, "Yeah, I'm Batman." or you want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. And like every time he was going to deliver an iconic line, they were sort of like, whoop, give me the line. It was a little much, but he was great, you know. And a lot of the other sort of callbacks were fun, although most of them weren't very well done. And what I mean is, the very ending where we learn that Barry's messed up, he did not fix the timeline or the multiverse. He's just messed it up further, and Batman has now been replaced by George Clooney. Like, that was fun and funny and kind of so fan servicey that it almost like is ridiculous, was the inclusion of a whole sequence of the Nick Cage Superman. So because that's something, you know, probably if you're watching this video, you probably heard the story, but nobody outside of the most hardcore DC movie fans are going to have any idea what that is a reference to, which is that Kevin Smith was, you know, in the 90s worked on a Superman treatment where Nick Cage was supposed to be Superman, and Nick Cage had done some screen tests for it with the costume and stuff, and Kevin Smith famously, you know, the producer was insisting that he fight a giant spider at the end of the movie. And so in Flash, when we see Nick Cage, it's his Superman fighting a giant spider. It's so it was fun, and it was funny, and it was fan service for the 0.1% of people who would have any idea what that was, other than just scratching your head, go, why is there a CGI Nick Cage Superman fighting a spider? There was a lot of that sort of fan service where you're just losing everybody. But for those of us who know the stuff, it is fun. So, you know, I liked that. Here were the big problems of the movie, and there were 2 or 3 like top line main issues with the film. Number 1 and number 2 are sort of go together. Number 1, Ezra Miller shouldn't have been in the film. You know, I know they'd already spent however tens of millions of dollars, and it would have been too much or whatever to recast afterwards or whatever, but like ultimately the movie ended up losing $200 million anyway, so does it really matter? Were you going to lose more than that if you spend another $15 million reshooting the scenes? Or maybe you lose less than that. Like, it was just a bad decision. I don't care what the finances were. Ezra Miller should not have been in the film. And Ezra Miller's performance in the film, and I want to blame the writing on this part of this. So is his younger version that he meets, that's one of the main characters in the movie throughout, is so annoying that you just want to smash your TV so you don't have to see or listen to that horrible character again. And again, it's one of the main part of the movie is current Flash goes back in time, accidentally meets 18-year-old Barry, and the two of them have to team up for the entire film. And 18-year-old Barry is so irritating that it really tanks the enjoyment of the whole film. And what doesn't make sense about the performance or the writing of the character is that, yes, it's an 18-year-old version, so he's supposed to be an immature version, but what we have here is a character who's not just an immature version of Barry, it's a character who is an idiot. And that doesn't make any sense, because we see Barry in the films he's like a science genius guy, you know? He's figured out how to shrink the suit into the ring, and he's designed the suit, and he understands all this mathematical stuff with the speed and all this stuff, right? But young Barry is an idiot. He just is like straight up a fool and a moron. And is basically like, what if the younger Barry Allen was being played by, you know, a younger version of Pauly Shore? like, is just intentionally stupid. And it doesn't make any sense, and it was so irritating. So they needed, I don't know how much of that is the writing and how much is the performance, because it's really hard to parse that. But if they had a different actor, which they should have had, they may have been able to fix that, because that was terrible. So I don't know what they were doing with that, but it really, really made large sections of the film almost unwatchable, because he was so irritating and he was in every scene. And then finally, I'm not a CGI snob, but the third big issue was the CGI was just terrible, and there were long sequences that were entirely CGI. Like, when they get to the end and they're in the time bubble in the Speed Force, the way they visually decided to show all the different alternate reality paths that he could pick from was weird. It was like they were in an amphitheater, and every row of seats was like a different time thing. And it was just visually, it was just weird. It looked weird. And then they bring in their version of the alternate worlds at the end, where they come in and you're seeing like the Christopher Reeve Superman or the Adam West Batman. Their universes are these giant, everlasting gobstopper looking things that are made up of all of these video images around the outside that are all these different versions of those characters. And it just, like, it was visually confusing and just dumb looking, and the CGI was bad, and it was just weird. And then there were all these like long action sequences, including the Nicolas Cage thing, that were completely CGI, and they looked like a video game from 2010. So, like, again, I'm not a CGI snob. I generally don't care about this sort of thing. But it was just jarring. Just, like, long sequences where the people didn't look close to being, a person, which is fine if you're playing a video game from 2010, or even if you're playing a video game now, because the whole game is like that. It's supposed to be like that. But when you're going from live action into a sequence where it's just like, from DCU Online, it was just bad. It was rough. So, yeah, it was not good. It was also some problems just on a basic story level, because you want to have a character arc for your character. And the end of the movie is basically where we realize that Barry hasn't actually learned anything. And so that's a problem, because the character goes through all of this stuff and doesn't learn anything and doesn't change and is the same person at the end as he was at the beginning. There's no development. There's no arc. There's a bunch of stuff that happens and has no consequence to him. It just has consequence to everybody else, which we don't care about, because everyone else is just changing from one version to the next. So, like, whatever. It wasn't trying to say anything. It didn't say anything, and it wasn't trying to say anything, and that's a problem. As I've said before, as a writer, like, your story has to be about something, or it's not actually a story, and that was what we have here. It wasn't about anything. So it was not good. Again, we were entertained watching it. And we have a subscription, so it was essentially free, right? But it was bad. Now, I've got another movie I'm going to be doing a review of soon that's only it's tangential to comics, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that was a movie that was objectively better on every level, but was not as entertaining. So I'll talk more about that next time. So anyway, if you're wondering about the Flash movie, if you can see it for free and you want to see the fan service and the cameos and stuff, you may be entertained, but just get ready to just bang your head against the wall every time Ezra Miller says anything for 2.5 hours. So let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you next time.